Welcome to the Contagious Code podcast, where we dive deep into code, learn practical skills, celebrate the beauty of engineering, and eliminate imposter syndrome. I'm Tejas Kumar, and I've been building on the web for over 20 years at places like Vercel, Spotify, Zeta, and more. Today, my guest is Tracy Lee, the founder and CEO of This.Labs. This.Labs is a company built on open source, offering a number of solutions for building projects with open source, particularly in the Angular and NX spaces, but also with a wide variety of tools. In our discussion today, Tracy and I talk about how she built this company on open source using these technologies. We explore finding creativity in building on the web and really what it takes to sustain such a business. We also talk about carving out space for oneself to belong. Tracy is a female entrepreneur and founder in a largely male-dominated industry. And so, of course, we're going to talk about that. What does it mean to actually find spaces where you may be told you don't belong and then make yourself belong? Finally, we talk about Tracy's strategy to conferences and social media and developer relations and engagement. It's a great course, really, masterclass on how to maximize this, because what Tracy does, for example, at conferences is will get a hotel suite, a very large suite with a living room and a lot of space, and fill it up with snacks and goodies and candy, and then just invite people from the conference, speakers and attendees, whoever, just to come hang out. And while they hang out in the suite and enjoy the snacks and talk, you also just get some really high quality networking and get to know people, and whether you can serve them or not through business and your consultancy, or if they can serve you, right? It's really great for meeting people and really maximizing your time at conferences. So in our discussion, we cover all of this. If you're interested in what it takes to build a developer-focused business on open source, do it successfully, and network effectively, this discussion is for you. If you're also interested in the diversity and inclusion perspective of the tech industry at large and how to carve out space for you to belong, maybe you're an entrepreneur from a underrepresented group as well, then also this episode is for you. Now, I'd like to offer this to all of you at no cost, because this is very much separate to my day job. The way we can do that is through partners and sponsors. Let's take a moment to acknowledge them. The Contagious Code podcast is sponsored by Code Crafters. Code Crafters teaches you how to code similar to me, in that they have you pick a language, a programming language like Python or JavaScript, whatever, and a tool that you or most developers use every day, like Redis or Docker or Git. And what they have you do is build this tool in a language you choose. And by doing it, you get better at the language by understanding how to write more of it. And you get better at the tool by understanding how it works on the inside. They have a generous free tier. But if you want to start paying, you can get 40% off. That's nearly half off the paid tier if you use the link in the show notes. That's tej.as/codecrafters. The Contagious Code podcast is partnered with SquiggleConf. SquiggleConf is happening in a few weeks in the Boston Aquarium, and it's an incredible conference focused on developer tooling, particularly the squiggly underlines in your code, organized by a guest on the podcast and a dear friend, Josh Goldberg. We encourage you to visit it. And if you want to attend for free, share this episode on social media, say you want to attend for free, and you'll enter a raffle to do so. We are excited about SquiggleConf, and we can't wait to hear your stories from there. Finally, the Contagious Code podcast is also partnered with That Conference. That Conference is a multidisciplinary, family-first conference that happens in the United States and Wisconsin and in Texas twice a year. Texas is coming up in January. It's many tracks, and honestly, there's great speakers and organizers. If you'd like to attend, share this episode on social media, and you'll enter a raffle to do so. Thank you for sticking around. Now for my conversation with Tracy Lee. Tracy Lee, so great to have you on the Contagious Code podcast.
Very excited to be here. Thanks so much for inviting me.
Yeah, we've met at so many different conferences. Most recently at, I think, Cascadia.js, where I had the honor of being interviewed by you for your podcast. So it's been a long time coming. I actually look up to your podcast. In many ways, yours inspires mine. So I just immediately off the bat, I want to thank you for the work you're doing.
Oh yes, and same. I can't wait. I think is it this week or next week? I'm getting you on so I can talk a little bit more about the magic you did on stage. It was
and the magic you did on stage. I mean, we did similar magic. We both did Gen AI and RAG, which we will talk about in today's discussion. I'm super excited. Before we get started, there's you show up on like almost every time I open social media, X, formerly known as Twitter, like you're there, like you're on the timeline. And I feel like I'm not unique here. You show up on a bunch of people's timelines. And honestly, I feel like you don't need an introduction, but just out of tradition, will you do a little bit of an introduction to yourself for the listeners, yourself, this.labs, if you want to get into how you got from where you were to this.labs, let's do that.
Sure. Okay. Well, my name's Tracy. You can follow me on Twitter at LadyLeet or on LinkedIn at Tracy S. Lee. Are you on LinkedIn, Tejas?
I am. What is the S?
Are you like
in Tracy?
on it? It's my middle name.
Okay.
It's like you see some people's email addresses and you see 819 at the end, and you're like, is that your birthday? Probably.
Yeah.
Well, the S is...
When you can drop what is the S?
The S is my middle name.
Okay.
Which is
I'm starts with a Y. No, but I am on LinkedIn. I'm actually on LinkedIn. I use it fairly judiciously. I enjoy it.
Okay.
What I don't enjoy is the AI generated content. There's a lot of like stuff, a lot of long form posts that mean really nothing. I struggle reading those sometimes, but and then like they have to have like emoji bullet points and things. There's a whole meme around it, but I do use it. Yeah. So okay, so you're on X as Lady Leet and on LinkedIn as Tracy S. Lee.
Yes. But I think with LinkedIn, it's just like Instagram or anything else. You have to train the algorithm.
Yeah.
So you just have to train the algorithm to stop showing you the BS long AI posts that you get.
Yeah. To be fair, I used to do that when I was new on LinkedIn. I think maybe that's why. I wonder if all these folks are in an echo chamber. Anyway, okay, without distracting too much from your introduction.
Yeah. Oh, yes.
Great.
Yes.
Twitter, LinkedIn.
Sorry. Yes. And then I'm the co-founder of a company called This.Labs, which I started about 7 years ago, actually almost 8 years ago now, with some folks, including Ben Lesh from the RxJS core team or creator of RxJS. I'm also on the RxJS core team. I'm a Google developer expert, a Microsoft MVP. Community means a lot to me, which is why I'm involved in all these initiatives and really just trying to create more content that is more accessible to people. And I think Carter over at DataStax actually said this to me, which I love and I'm going to steal. The democratization of AI is like something that's really exciting me right now because, as you and I both know, it's so easy and so accessible to people. So I'm pretty excited about that type of stuff. We do consulting. So we basically, software consulting. So anything from helping with migrations to helping build new greenfield projects. We work with a lot of innovation arms. Some of our clients you probably know, like Sentry, Cloudinary, Twilio, Meta, Google, et cetera, Stripe, Bill.com. I could go on, but it's really fun to get to work with like really cool engineering teams and companies.
That is so cool. I had no idea that you were part of the RxJS core team, and you've done a lot of work with NX as well, right?
Not a lot of work with NX, no. But I did in my recent talk on Angular, I was using an NX monorepo to house everything, to do the little chatbot thing before I decided to do stuff in React, and then now we're just using Ravel.
Yeah, or Turbo Repo.
Next, yeah.
Awesome. Well, that's so much I want to get into there. The education, the democratization of not just AI but information in general, and running the consultancy. Maybe I can start by asking there's obviously some synergy here to speak. Since speaking of LinkedIn, but there's a synergistic effect, right, between doing the communication and the education that you do at conferences. You and your team, I believe some other folks also speak at things. There's an overlap. There's a Venn diagram between that and the consulting work. How does that work? Is the education sort of an outreach arm, or can it serve that purpose? Or is it more just like a nonprofit arm? Like we're just giving this to the community because we have expertise and we want to share it?
I think it's more of a non-profit arm. I think I actually I got into the consultancy because I just wanted to hang out and speak at conferences and do what I do and build brands, right? Like I get really excited about that type of stuff. So that the consultancy kind of allowed me to do so because we had other people on the team working on things. And, you know, obviously from a brand awareness perspective, it was good. So, but yeah, no, I don't speak at conferences really to think, hey, you know, what am I going to get out of this? I more do it because I think it's important to educate and it's fun. And, you know, we all love hanging out. And at this point in time, you know, I think once you start going to conferences, especially on the speaker circuit, those become all your friends, right? So how often do you hang out with your friends? Well, every month or two. And you see each other all around the world, right?
Yeah. It is a unique type of friendship. I think of, for example, one of my best friends from the conference circuit is David Khurshid, David K. Piano. You may know him.
Yes, we're an investor in his company, actually.
In Stately. Oh, yes. Wow. Awesome. We had him as a guest on the pod. I wish I was an investor in Stately. In any case, we met in 2019 at a conference, and the conference it was in this old school venue, and it had a piano there. And you know, David, like it's in his like nickname. He's really into the piano. So he said he wanted to play it, and then the conference was like, "Oh, Tejas, you play guitar, right?" So they bought me a guitar, and we literally just played a concert. That was our first time we ever met in 2019, and now 5 years later, you know, our friendship has grown into something very special. And I agree. I think for those listening, it's definitely worth investing in, getting in there. And that's hopefully today in our discussion, something we'll get out, that listeners will get out, and we'll be able to get into speaking at conferences as well. Let's start the discussion about this.labs. I want to really dive into what it takes to build a successful consultancy. Now, I had a consultancy in 2023 for all of 1 year. You've been doing this.labs for 8 times that much. I would consider it successful based on the clientele you service, as you mentioned, Stripe and Google and Meta. And what does it take? How do you do that? Let's maybe draw a line, right, from the beginning of this.labs to where it is today.
Gosh, I don't know. I mean, I think, you know, I wonder actually also what it takes to build a successful consultancy. You can do it in so many ways. But most consultancies that I talk to, it's really founder-led growth. And so, you know, most of the business from this comes from my network and my connections. You know, Tejas is going to start referring this business, and it's going to be amazing. But no, it's what does it take? I think a lot of it takes mentality. So you, for example, you know, when you can go to a place and you can feel like you fit in or not.
Yeah.
Right? Like you walk into a speaker room and you can either say I belong or I don't, let's say. Yeah. Or you walk into a conference and you can feel like I belong or I don't. And, you know, I'll give you an example. My last startup, we were fundraising. And when you're fundraising, there's a bunch of dudes in suits that you're supposed to pitch, and then they're supposed to give you money, and you can feel like you belong or you don't, and you can decide whether you belong or you don't. But if you decide that you belong, then you will somehow be successful in that area. Right. So I think a lot of it from a building company perspective is just deciding that you are going to be successful and giving yourself no other option than to be successful. And if you do that, I think that's the first step. Because right? Like,
yeah.
I mean, same thing with, let's say, a country club. Are there country clubs like not in the US, or is that a US thing?
I don't know. I don't know what you mean by country club.
All right, a country club is where, like, you know, supposedly, okay, so the stereotype, actually, we should ask ChatGPT, what is a country club? ChatGPT, I'm opening it right now. That way I don't have to give a bias. What is a country club?
I don't have to give a bias. That's awesome.
Yes, Les. We'll just ask. A country club is a private club that typically offers a variety of recreational sports and social activities, including golf course, tennis courts, swimming pools, dining facilities.
Yes.
It's like one of those places, right? But it's kind of
a place where rich men gather, no?
Yes, exactly. Okay. I wasn't going to say it. I was thinking ChatGPT might say it, but thanks, Tejas. Yeah. So that's kind of the same thing, right? Like, do you feel like you belong, or do you not? Do you want to belong? Do you feel like you belong? Do you decide that you're going to belong? I think a lot of us, especially coming from underrepresented places and folks, historically underrepresented groups, we don't always feel like we belong in certain scenarios or situations. But if we decide that we do, then we will. You know? Sometimes that's
That
all it takes.
that is such a powerful, and I use the word powerful intentionally, take, right? Because like a lot of us derive our sense of belonging from whether it's given to us or not. Like to sort of draw back to the speaker room, I've walked
Right.
into speaker rooms where there's, and this is not to disparage Google at all, but there's like 8 Googlers in there and no one else. And I walk into like their clicky conversation and they just give me a look. They're like, "What are you doing here?" And I just felt bad and left.
Right.
That happened to me. Versus I walk into a speaker room and it's like you mentioned, it's a bunch of my friends and I'm like, "Oh my gosh, I haven't seen you in 3 years. What's up? How are you doing, David K. Piano?" You know, and it's an entirely different vibe. But in both cases, it's my sense of belonging was given to me by the people there, by the majority party. And I think, you know, I'm not a sociologist or evolutionary scientist. I don't claim to be, but like I have to suspect that as part of human evolution, that's how we evolved, right? Is more you walk up to a tribe and you go like, "Hey, you going to support me or throw me to the wolves?" And hopefully if they support you, then they become your tribe. So it does depend on them. So like what I'm hearing from you is you're like flipping the dynamic. You're like, no, you don't
You're
have to
in
give me
control.
approval.
Yes.
How does that work though? Because I imagine, and I hate that I'm about to say this, right? But like a country club, let's picture like the worst possible country club full of these very wealthy white men sort of having a big, you know, I don't know, my watch is bigger than yours type of competition or something. And a woman walks in here and goes, "Hey, what's up, guys? Guess what? I belong here." How's that going to go? I mean, like for me, this would be terrifying if I was in the woman's shoes.
Yeah.
But what I'm hearing from you is no, it doesn't need to be terrifying. You just have to be okay with it.
I think you choose. So, you know, another example would be, let's say, if you're a JavaScript developer walking into a big group of .NET, you know, .NET speakers. Do you belong? Do you feel like you belong? I don't know, but you can decide that you belong and start a conversation. And I think what we in the industry and probably everywhere else, we all talk about these safe spaces, right?
Yeah.
Where we feel like we belong, or creating inclusive environments where everyone belongs. But while those are all amazing and everything like that, I think also the way you get ahead in life, and again, this is a choice. You don't have to do this. But if you, in certain situations, if you want to get ahead in life, you have to decide you belong somewhere and go through that uncomfortability of feeling that way and then just deciding, "Hey, I'm going to do this," and then get over it. It's kind of like maybe that first speaking engagement you have, right? You're scared, you know, you're stressed out, you've recited this thing a million times, maybe your hand is shaking, but you decided you're going to do it. And then all of a sudden, because you did it, you all of a sudden belong, let's say on the speaker circuit. And then it just is so natural after many years. And so I think in any scenario, right, like the only thing that's really stopping you is you saying, "Hey, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to get past the level of uncomfort and get comfortable in a place where I feel like I want to belong."
Yeah. I think I feel super encouraged. I had a whole discussion planned, and the cool thing about guests is you never know where it's going to go, and I'm so glad you took it in this direction, because I struggle with this. Like I moved to Germany like nearly 10 years ago, and I still haven't felt like I belong with the broader like German population, right? Because there's a lot of cultural differences. I never grew up with like techno clubs and beer culture and soccer. Like right now is the European Soccer Cup's happening, and I never really got into that. And so there's an element of I feel like I don't belong, but I think that what we could do to extrapolate your idea is decide we belong and decide we're going to belong. And
Yeah.
of course, there's always going to be people who will literally look you in the eye and be like, listen, you don't belong here. But from my experience, at least, those people are few and far between. And typically those people tend to be somewhat marginalized themselves for good reason. Right. So I think there may be in our minds, what I'm hearing from you, Tracy, there may be in our minds more of a barrier to belonging than there is actually out there in the world. So like we just perceive that we are less likely to belong more strongly than is true. And so by actually saying, no, I belong here, we're sort of undoing that own internal fear in our minds of not belonging. Does that track? Does that resonate at all?
And you don't have to, right? Like, for example, when I was fundraising and there was a bunch of VCs in suits, I did not feel like I belonged. And I just didn't, I couldn't, it just didn't click with me. And I met an investor. He was my first investor. It was the founder of Match.com. And he was a really chill dude. And he said, you know what? You don't have to go fundraise with people you're not into, right? Because those are the people you're going to be working with. And at the time, I kind of thought they were a little bit douchey. So I didn't really want to work with douchey people. And I felt like I had to. But he told me I didn't. And then when I fundraised, I actually fundraised with people that really were very chill. And I think that is also really important, right? Like we create the space. For example, at this dot, it's interesting because I've recently been doing recruiting, but who do you recruit? You recruit people who are very similar to you, right? Like culture really does start from the top. So I noticed that I attract diverse individuals versus, an ocean of non-diverse individuals, whatever that means, however you want to take it.
Yeah. Versus an ocean of homogenous people. I think this tracks with another discussion we did. So we have an episode coming out soon with Monica Sarbu. She's the CEO and founder of Zeta, where I used to work. They have the coolest logo. For those watching, it's this
a butterfly.
Cool it's so awesome. Look at it. And so it's called a Zeta fly. And so nice. And she says the same thing. Like for her, culture is the most important. And because she has this position of being the founder and CEO, they also tend to attract more like a more diverse set of
right.
Yeah.
Like I definitely have people who say, I've always wanted to work for a woman before. So I'm like, all right, I guess here we are. But no, it's totally true. You attract, but then the question, right, is as you grow, I think every 5 to 7 years or so, at least for me, I always look up and say, okay, I've stagnated somehow. So what am I going to do next? How am I going to push myself into a certain scenario or situation, or what am I going to challenge myself to do next? Right. And, you have every ability to decide what type of challenges you want to challenge yourself with. And, at the time, for example, for me with the VCs, I didn't want to do that. But I might change my mind. I might change my mind right now and want to do that. I don't want to do that right now. But I'm not fundraising right now. But point being, if I was, I might want to actually be attracting those types of folks for certain reasons.
Right. Do you ever get introduced as the woman founder or the woman CEO? And if yes, how does that sit with you? And I ask because I've spoken to a number of different women, but also like people of color and like various diverse background folks. And some really don't like that. They don't, why am I the woman founder? Why am I just not the founder? Why is there this like qualifier versus other folks going like, yes, I am. And I'm happy it's there because this shows representation. So like from all my discussions, it's pretty much 50-50. How do you feel about that?
I think it depends on who's saying it. Right. So I think it's hard sometimes. For example, I don't talk a lot about being a woman.
Yeah.
Because 2019, I spent all the keynotes I did at conferences talking about diversity in tech and how to increase diversity in tech. We have an apprentice program, for example, which tries to help underrepresented folks to get their first job, right? So bridging the gap between boot camp and first job is is the hardest. I mean, a bootcamp grad, how do I get my first job? So we created an apprentice program for that. But what ended up happening after that entire year was all anybody wanted to talk to me about was being a woman in tech. And it got old fast. So while I am still a woman in tech and very proud to be one, I don't spend a lot of time talking about it because it's not the thing I want to always talk about.
Yeah.
So again, I think people create their own identities. You have the power to create your own identity. And if you decide you want to change whatever that identity is, you have every ability to do so. You just have to do it and say, yes, I'm going to do that.
Fantastic. Like the big message I'm hearing very loud from you, Tracy, this whole time is you have the power. I think a lot of listeners will also agree. Like this entire episode so far has been so empowering, and I can't wait to see how it develops. This Dot Labs has a really, or it seems like in the beginning at least, it had, and it still does. It has a really strong foundation, right? Like you're all, as I mentioned with the timeline, you're always on the timeline, and so is this Dot. Like the finger on the pulse is very strong. How can, for those listening, like maybe they want to get into the speaking circuit or they even want to start a consultancy. I believe you're not petty enough to like keep information from people for competitive benefit. But if somebody wants to like have this solid foundation and stay relevant, how did you identify sort of where the zeitgeist is, what the market needs in JavaScript, but also broader?
I think you just have to figure out what you get excited about. So I feel like 2020, everybody was just talking about COVID. In the US, everybody was recovering from the election stuff, right? So, or was that 2021? I can't remember. Or no, it was 2020. Anyways, it was just a big blur. And there was really nothing that exciting going on, to be honest. I mean, once 2020 hit, I was like, where's the innovation? What am I excited about? And it took a long time. It took a long time for me to get excited and to recreate what I was going to get excited about. And it wasn't until this year where everyone's arguing about React Server components and AI is something really exciting to where now all of a sudden I'm excited again. And I think that, I guess I could have gotten excited about other things, but I didn't because I wasn't excited about them personally. And I think that's really important, right? Like finding something that excites you. Because if it doesn't excite you, and you have to do it 24/7, it's just like not going to be interesting. But the consultancy side of things, I mean, what did I do? I remember I learned how to make a website, and I can't remember how or why I learned how to make a website. Maybe I learned Photoshop, and I said, you know what, I can build websites. And so I was working as a receptionist at this random place, and there was a deli across the street, and I never knew what was on the menu. And I just said, hey, you need a website, you need rebranding, like what is this? And then so I convinced him to basically just give me free food in order for me to like kind of redo his menu and things like that.
Wow. You showed them you belong.
Yeah, it was like the same thing where, I walked into a froyo place and said, hey, I can do your website for you. And there was a lot of drop shadows for that website. It was back in the day. But point being, right? I mean, they paid me $300 to do their website for them, this froyo website. Same thing. I just did it again. I said, okay, well, you know what? This Peruvian restaurant needs pictures. I have a friend. Let's take pictures for them and let's create a website for them. Okay, done. Another $300. And this was while I was in college. But I guess I've always been that person to just start things, like that's just been my personality. But even sometimes it's scary for me, but I think, again, you just have to do it and see what happens. And, what's the worst that could happen? But once you start, it's that idea, right? I mean, I'm sure with you as a consultancy as well, right? Like you do something where you feel uncomfortable. You ask for business. You say you do consult. You do something. And then, just like speaking, that first speaking engagement, you have you're nervous, you're stressed out, you say you're going to do it better next time, and then you do it again and again and again, and then all of a sudden it becomes something very natural to you, and so it becomes more a part of your personality, which I think is something that's important to just kind of do and see what happens.
Yes, totally. My camera just broke, but I'm still here. For those watching, I'm now officially just a big rainbow screen. We'll fix that. But yes, I fully hear. I fully understand that. You mentioned getting excited about things. What is your primary news feed? Is it Twitter? Is it LinkedIn? How do you get stuff to get excited about?
Well, I get excited about solving problems. So, for example, when I hear everyone complaining about React Server components, I'm like, okay, why is everyone arguing so much? And really, in my opinion, for everyone arguing, it's the lack of education. So I get excited about, here's a problem I can solve. I can create more education in the community and help solve this problem about React Server components and why it's interesting. And why you should care. Or fine,
right,
don't care, but stop complaining and at least understand why you're complaining or not.
Yeah. But where do you hear people complaining about it?
Twitter. It's Twitter. Yes, the complaints are on Twitter. Yeah.
Nice.
Or the Modern Web Podcast. Yeah.
I agree. The Modern Web Podcast you host. So even that, probably a lot of the information comes from Twitter.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. I think that's it. This is the takeaway for listeners. I want to say it definitively here, and I'm sure you agree. Is Twitter is awesome for web and JavaScript news. It is my exclusives. I go to conferences a lot, and as you know, and people keep asking me hey, how do you stay up to date with things? Honestly, just go on Twitter and follow a bunch of folks. Follow Tracy, follow Lady Leet, follow Kent T. Dodds, follow Kitsa if you like angry stuff. Sure, yeah. And if you'll stay up to date. Kitsa is just an angry dude. We'll maybe get him on the podcast. I want to, you've got a big family. As far as I know, and you've obviously you run this consultancy. You've got a big family. You've got 100 different demands, but still, you do a good job of identifying market needs and understanding where the pulse is and getting excited about things. The question I have here is: there's a number of folks, right, Tracy, who are they're maybe students. They've got busy schedules. They're maybe working paycheck to paycheck. And sometimes it can feel like, I'm sure you can relate, sometimes it can feel like I just don't have time to find something to get excited about because I'm making ends meet. As I'm sure you have some level of with your huge family and your consultancy. Where in the day do you find the time to do this? Do you actually carve out time? My lunch is for discovering stuff to get excited about, or how does that work?
Well, I think you should if you're not, but I don't do that, but I do finding spaces where you're open and you can just kind of, for example, I have so many emails I need to go through, and I know it's so funny because as I'm doing my emails last night for 2 hours, I'm like, I know I should be focusing on only the important ones, because if I don't do it, I'm not going to get to the important ones tonight. However, it's just kind of nice to have that free, empty, fine, I'm just going to do, last in, first out on my emails. And I think just hanging out with people kind of creates creativity. So, Luke on my team, for example, sometimes I just need 2 hours with him to just hang out on a video chat and talk about nothing, because in that nothingness, that's when things become potential inspiration, right? So it's almost like just ADDing with somebody, and then all of a sudden something happens, and you know, that's how things are created, right? That's how startups happen. So I think creating space for that, at this dot we have channels, and then we just have huddles that just happen where people are just working and say, hey, come join me. But during that, right, that's the thing that people kind of miss, where it's you're maybe not talking about anything, but then, oh, all of a sudden something sparks an idea and then creativity happens, or you get to know somebody a little bit better for some reason. You just never know what'll happen.
Yeah.
And I think for me, it's really just talking to random people. Like I get inspired by other people. And so when I hear other people talking, I get excited. And then that kind of fuels my fire. And that's kind of how I create creativity for myself.
Yeah. Kind of like talking to you at Cascadia about AI, and now I'm going to be on your podcast because that was a lovely conversation.
Yeah.
Do you feel like it's more of a struggle to make sure this stuff happens? As you mentioned, is ADD out? More in a remote, because this dot is fully remote, right?
Yes, we are.
And I remember back to my office days, like I would have these beautiful moments at least once a week. Since moving to a fully remote position, I really don't. A lot of my team is in California. I'm in Germany. 6 p.m. my time is 9 a.m. theirs. Yeah. And so like, I guess the huddles is one way. Do you also experience this though, that it's far more challenging to have this like idea ping pong in a remote company?
It is. You kind of need to create it. But the reason why we're 100% remote is because I believe in managing by objective. So I think it's, the trade-off is better anyways, right? Like you can get so much more work done, in my opinion, in a remote environment where you're just, doing what's needed, I guess, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I don't really like environments where, like my last company, maybe I just didn't really like, this is why culture is so important to me. My last company, we were a bunch of, 20-something-year-old girls who were trying to handle this thing that was scaling like crazy. So we took people on food adventures, and we went from 15 people to 125 people in 3 months. And then by the end of the year, we were at 250 people.
Wow.
And so if you think about that and you take like attrition rate and people joining, we were onboarding 20 people a week. Okay. And
oh my goodness.
Yeah, it was really crazy. But I didn't do, at that rate, you can't do all the interviewing and all the hiring and things like that, right? But for the key people that were part of the team, this clique formed with these 3 girls. And it was so funny. I guess I shouldn't talk about their hair colors or anything like that, but each one had a different hair color, okay? Okay. And it was very much a mean girl situation. And, it was funny to say, oh, you can't sit with us. Like, just like this, like, oh, it's so funny, right? No, it wasn't funny. It was crappy and awful. And I was coming from a corporate situation where I really hated, like, I didn't really like the people I worked with because all they cared about was checking to see if I was here by 8 a.m. because I was supposed to be in by 8 a.m. So 8:15, I would get a look.
That sounds awful.
Yeah, it was awful. And I'm thinking, do you have anything better to do with your life? This is awful, And I don't work that way, right? And I think that you need like people like me who are creative and excited, who are willing to work till 10 p.m. if needed. I mean, gosh, when I was working that corporate job, I went and I found the corp dev people. I found the like lead architects of the actual organization and like asked them to teach me things about like networking. Like this is like layer 1, layer 2, like what are the different layers, like networking layers. And hang out with them till 8 p.m. at night, like just learning stuff, baking cookies for people when I went home. Like I was making that whole thing my life, my world, right? But then you have somebody who is just staring at you and being like, oh my gosh, you arrived at 8:05. It really discourages you and pushes people like me out of the organization. Or like, oh, you baked cookies. Well, what are you working? What's your objective here? Like, what are you trying to do politically? It's like, I'm just baking cookies and trying to learn and trying to like do amazing things. I'm not trying to do anything. anyways, my point is though that like, actually, I don't know what my point was, but
Yeah, we're talking about having ideas with the interruptions of office work as opposed to
yeah. Well, okay, so I just gave you two scenarios in which I did not like. You know what I'm saying? So for me, working remotely, if we can manage by objective and there's not this whole like, are you in the office? Are you not? Oh, are you stressed out? Are you not? Like, oh, let's go grab coffee. Like, let's go do this. Oh, my boyfriend broke up with me. Like, there's just so much stuff that's not related to it. So I found it very hard in my last company to get anything done when I was in the office, because there was always something going on interpersonally that we had to deal with, right? And while like all of that is great and you should obviously handle things interpersonally, and I have good relationships with the people I work with, of course, having to basically have that be like 8 hours of your day versus like actually getting something done, I think is like a little bit more stressful, right? Because you end up working more hours because you have to actually get something done. And so I ended up working till 2 in the morning and then waking up at 7, and like, it was just unhealthy in my opinion. And I think it was actually more stressful for the people in the office as well, because, again, if you're spending like 4 hours of your day just kind of dealing with other people's stuff and office chatter and not getting anything done, then you're having to do it at night to meet an objective.
Yeah, there's a really great book about this by Dr. Cal Newport called Slow Work. He's a computer scientist, right? And he talks about how if you're laying brick on brick, then the time you spend matters at the office, because like you can lay a certain number of bricks per hour, for example. But if you're doing what is it, cognitive work, knowledge work, he calls it, butts in a chair doesn't count anymore, because the brain doesn't work that way. In fact, the more time you spend thinking about a hard cognitive problem, the worse you'll probably be at it, like at the tail end of that.
Yeah.
Right. And so many folks go like, hey, I'm going to sleep on it. I'm going to wake up. My mind's going to be fresh. I'm going to have coffee. And so like, yeah, I think office work really optimizes for an outdated paradigm. And I'm so happy you called it out. And I'm so happy this dot. I think that's also probably what it takes to build, as we talked about, build a successful consultancy, right? Giving people the space to actually do the work, as opposed to saying, hey, are you in the office at 8:15 or 8:30?
Right.
Yeah, that's so important. Also, this dot, speaking about building a solid consultancy, this dot obviously has a great team. I met a few of your team, I guess now some former of your team, but brilliant people from what I know. How do you do that? What's your approach to building a team of real experts across like such a wide variety of technologies?
I don't know, but I think my approach is, because I still do all the hiring, which by the way, we are hiring about 6 people right now. So definitely apply across Vue, Angular, React, PHP, and .NET. But my approach is really like, yes, okay, fine, we need to fill positions, but what is who are the people that I can hire that are really going to become part of this dot, right? Because when you build a company, I really believe that company is based on the people. And like, I'm always excited about like, oh, what is this person going to bring? Like, what type of energy is this person going to bring to the org? Not everybody has to do that, right? Like, we definitely hire to hire, and people are part of the team, but I think I'm always looking for more people to like collaborate with, right? To almost become, I don't know if co-founders is the right word, but like somebody who can, riff off of and, become a really integral part of this dot team. And I think that type of stuff is not something where you can hire based on a job description. It's really just meeting people and figuring out if they're the right people or not. And then kind of going from there.
Right. So you look for people with a certain level of autonomy, you mentioned, who are self-driven, who can act like.
Yeah.
There was a job title I saw, entrepreneur in residence. I thought this was really cool because they basically bring some of that.
Yes. Well, it's so funny because I actually made this hire at Render, and he's joining next week. I'm really excited. But I wasn't looking. I was actually interviewing a few people for a DevRel position. And I was kind of trying to figure out how they jived, right? Because it's really more about, how do you work with somebody? Can you can you create something with somebody? And so I was looking to create something with somebody and trying to find the right person. And I wasn't, and this is actually a really good reason to go to conferences, because I'm hoping we hire this person I met at Cascadia as well. But the last day, I was getting ready to leave and I said, oh my gosh, I want to hire this guy. And so I spent the last half hour of the conference right before I was about to leave, looking for this guy. And he came out of the elevator and I grabbed him and I was like, you need to come work for this dot. And then I was a little aggressive because I kind of grabbed him and he kind of fell into my lap. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to be so aggressive there. It was by accident. But then I talked to him on Monday, the following Monday. This was a Friday. And then I talked to him on the following Monday. He's like, oh, I didn't realize that this was the conversation. I thought the conversation was just us doing some sort of podcast or something together. But anyways, he ended up joining the team.
Wow.
So yeah,
that's awesome.
So I'm really excited for him to join. But I think with him, I'm just excited to create with him. What can we build and what can this not become in the next 5 to 10 years? That type of stuff is really exciting. And I'm looking for those types of people to join the team. Along with, just developers who want to be developers and work with cool people, right? That too.
Yeah, but even the developers that I know at this dot, they all also have this entrepreneurial mindset where they give me the feeling, Tracy, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that they can carry a project themselves, meaning they sort of, we have a great episode with Jeff Escalante, who's the director of engineering at Clerk, and he mentioned, when it comes to leveling engineers, he says the more ambiguity you give someone in a problem, the more senior they'll show themselves to be or not. Meaning, if you just say, here's a really broad problem, fix it, then those who are uncomfortable with that typically will be, level 1, level 2 engineers. And those who go I got this, tend to be the more senior ones. Has that been also your experience with leveling?
Yes, I think the way we level here is, can you manage a ticket to, can you manage a project to, can you manage multiple projects? And, there's different steps in between, right? But it's a little bit like that here. Yeah. I think I've been having a lot of conversations on the engineering leadership podcast that I do about the role of project managers. And I think when we talk about this whole idea that product management is going away, what everybody is really trying to say is that the onus of owning product is more on the engineer now. And the reason why we say that is because, what's going to differentiate you as an engineer out in the world? People don't want, especially in this economy, people don't just want bodies. Tell me what to do and I'm going to code, right? Now, in order to be a better engineer or to be hireable, you really have to want to understand the business strategy, which means you're understanding more product. So it's more product engineering, in my opinion. I think that's what this thought is really good at. You have good product engineers who care about the business, who care about the problem they're trying to solve, versus people who are just going to sit there and code.
Right. I also see this when I was doing DevRel consulting. Same thing.
Yeah.
They often preferred people who can speak to a holistic set of features as opposed to a single feature.
Right.
This dot, again, I love, thank you, by the way, for sharing all this. It's so helpful as we slowly abstract or extract together what it takes to start and run a really successful consultancy. You've got so many different offerings, and you said you get excited about things, and this becomes sort of a focus area for the business. I think Gen AI, for example, with your great talk at Cascadia JS was one of them. But also,
involved with things like RxJS, and there seems to be a strong bias towards open source with this dot. What role has open source played in sort of the come up story of this dot labs? What role does open source play today, if any?
Well, I mean, I got into JavaScript mainly because I was hosting JavaScript meetups. I wasn't a developer, and I was just surrounded by all these JavaScript people, and I said, I should probably learn JavaScript. So I did. And when I say I was surrounded by a bunch of JavaScript developers, I mean I was surrounded by a bunch of people who were open source contributors to different frameworks and technologies, right? So Ember core team, Angular core team, RxJS core team were all kind of my friends. And so, really this thought is kind of built on that, built on the fact, I mean, for me, I'm a connector and I'm a builder. And so after a year of doing JavaScript, I said, let's just put everyone together and then let's just start a consultancy. And that's kind of what ended up happening. So I don't know. I mean, open source is kind of how this thought was built, what this thought was built on.
That is so cool.
Yeah.
That's also the story of so many, right? Like I think of NX, I think of Zephyr Cloud. All of this comes out of open source. I think a big takeaway here for listeners is if you're not already involved in open source, get involved in open source, because this is the thing. This starts companies, it starts friendships, it starts so many different things. With landing the high profile clients like Stripe and Google, what was that also just like network effects and friends, or was there more to it? Because like I used to work so my first job ever was at a consultancy, a brand consultancy. And we had like business development folks who would literally like go meet them and like cold call clients and so on. What ratio of this is like intentional focused business development versus just your friends?
We've never really done anything like that. So
that is so cool.
I mean, I guess that is a really true testament, right? To say, hey, if me, Tracy, I'm doing a job of DevRel because I'm just going out there and hanging out with people and doing things that excite me, and it's helped build a company. Well, I guess that's helpful, right? Because, again, all the business most of the business, okay, I would say comes from my network. And I think also it's just doing good work, right? Like, how do you get repeat business over and over again, or people who come back to you over and over again? It's crazy because, doing this for almost 8 years now, I look at some of the people who I met 8 years ago and I'm like, wow, I've seen you from, going through a divorce to getting a new job, to getting a new boyfriend, to moving in with your boyfriend, to, moving from this company to that company, to this company, to that company. I mean, it's kind of wild what can happen in 8 years of your career. And so it's, it's nice to be able to, I don't know, grow up together, if you will.
Yeah, that's so wholesome. I think that's probably also what makes this dot so different, because I feel like it's so different from the traditional consultancy model, and that's probably why, is because there's more to it than just business.
Right.
I'd love to talk a little bit about the technical side of things.
Sure.
What are the core technologies that you mentioned? RxJS, React, but there was also some Angular and NX before. If we zoom in on today specifically, there's AI, there's RAG, there's a bunch of stuff. What are the core technologies that you're working with today at this.labs?
Yeah, it's funny because it's changed year over year. And so we started off as an Ember shop, and then we were doing a lot of Angular, and then we were doing a lot of React. I would probably say it's maybe, 40% Angular, 40% React, 20% Vue on the front end. And then, whether it's like .NET or Java, that's kind of like split half and half, I would say. But We do a lot of things. I mean, we mostly do AWS, a little bit of Azure as well, but I think most people are on AWS, like most of our clients are on AWS. So, but
Wow,
it really depends, right? Like some people Svelte as well. We've done Svelte before. No Solid yet. Nobody wants to see. Oh, we've done Lit before. So it just depends. Yeah, we were doing like a lot of stuff with the web components for many, many years. But it just kind of depends on where the market is right now. And I will say we are actually a Vercel partner. I think they call them experts, a Vercel expert. So that's kind of been exciting to be a part of. And I mean, there's a lot of validation in just like knowing that. I mean, okay, there's a lot of complaints, okay, about like Next and Vercel and App Router and this and that and whatever.
Really? I've never heard any of it.
But really, it's really just wrapping your head around a new technology. Like it's not. I guess it's because it's a little bit of a paradigm shift, or you're having to kind of concern yourself with a few more things, right? Like you can't just do front end. Now you have this server that you have to kind of deal with and these components and like, with App Router and React Server components, like things are just a little bit, maybe like there's not as much documentation. The best practices are not as well written. So you're really having to kind of be on that forefront of technology and figure things out and be talking to the right people. And so that's fun and challenging, right? It's cool to be kind of at the forefront of that technology, but I can see also why it frustrates people. Like AWS Amplify frustrated us to all hell.
That's so interesting because like from what I know of AWS Amplify is it was invented to be easy.
Yeah. That's why we all started using it, right?
Yeah. I'm really glad to know that my experience is not unique in that it was just super painful. And I know a bunch of folks have tried. Like the great Nader Dabit has tried. There was Rachel Neighbors, also guest on the podcast, has tried, but like, gosh, I don't know why do you think? Look, this.labs developers love it as far as I know. If you could get hired at AWS or if they became a client and they said, hey, help us fix this.
Yeah.
Oh, is it the documentation? Okay, my question was, what would you fix?
I would fix the documentation. Because it's Michael Leando is amazing, right? But like not everybody talks to Michael Leando, and it's annoying that you have to know Michael Leando to get something done, if that makes sense. And so when we were having issues, we would say, hey, Michael, there's an issue. And he's like, oh, okay, let me surface that to the team. Okay, this issue is now fixed. Right. But like, I think, okay, so it's not just the documentation, but it's also probably DevRel going out and figuring out what the biggest pain points are, and then figuring out how to improve the framework based on that feedback. So that, in my opinion, I don't know how it is now because we actually migrated off of it. So we don't typically use Amplify anymore. But that, in my opinion, was difficult. And, we were using it for, like 2 years or something. So it's not like we, came and went. But at some point in time, we just said, okay, you know what? This isn't working for us.
Costing more than it benefits us.
Yes,
probably,
exactly.
Right. Mm-hmm. Do you feel like DevRel is dead? There's a lot of discourse nowadays around like DevRel is a zero interest rate policy.
Yeah.
What are you? I mean, you do so much of DevRel. Your company is built on, as you mentioned, your network and DevRel. How is that statement true? Could it be true? Is it? Yeah. How do you feel about that statement?
I think that people who are de-investing in DevRel right now are definitely going to suffer the consequences. But I think DevRel is very long tail. So you don't see it right now. I think a lot of business people are maybe looking at the bottom line and what's driving revenue. And DevRel isn't driving revenue. But what is DevRel actually supposed to do, right? DevRel is supposed to help with retention. DevRel is supposed to help people make better products and surface problems to the product team, and which helps with retention, which helps with documentation, right? So I think while like a sales team, for example, maybe a lot of dollars are spent more in sales teams. Now, if that's the case, okay, you're getting a lot of sales in, but all of a sudden the attrition rate is so much higher because you don't have anybody catching the clientele that's coming in, right? And again, I think DevRel is a very long tail type thing. So sure, you can fire DevRel and then you can, ride the wave of what your DevRel team has built for, let's say, 1 year, 2 years, maybe 1 year. But then all of a sudden on the third year, you're going to say, oh my gosh, well, where are we? And then you're going to have to start from ground zero again. And then, okay, you're not going to see the results for another 3 years. So that's like a 6-year period in which you are course correcting, not having DevRel and making that decision. But I think the biggest problem with DevRel is when you're directly tying it to business. And since you can't really, you can, but you can't. We in DevRel always talk about how metrics are broken and what is the actual metric to follow, et cetera, et cetera. But, will business ever say, oh, you know what, we should have hired DevRel? No, they're not going to. They're going to say, oh, okay, we're having an attrition problem now. What do we need to hire? We need to hire somebody who does more documentation. Oh, our brand awareness is falling. We need somebody to blah, blah, blah at conferences. But they're never going to say, oops, a few years ago we fired DevRel. They're just going to say, okay, there's a need now. And then they're going to see the need. So I don't know, maybe business is like just really not seeing the need at this moment because they're focused more on revenue. But I do think that it will hurt companies not to continue to invest in. It's like you're getting rid of customer support almost, right?
Yeah. You're getting rid of, like, every company that has customers has customer relations, as far as I know. It's so important to maintain those relationships. Like CRMs, entire like classes of software exist for this. Right. Because those are relationships you want to manage. I think when I hear you say that companies are optimizing more for revenue, and that's why they're getting rid of DevRel, would it be fair to add, instead of, or to narrow the type of revenue they're looking for is short-term revenue?
Yes, exactly.
Because DevRel does bring long-term revenue. At least that's our thesis, right? And that's been the case for this .labs. If so, you hired this person from Cascadia.js. Congrats for DevRel. From Render. Yeah, thanks for correcting me. So the expectation is not that they bring in revenue or that DevRel brings in revenue in the short term. What is the short-term expectation? Is there a short-term expectation, or is it more like this is a long tail, whatever, we'll talk in a year?
I didn't really hire him for DevRel. I hired him to build something. But I think the way, because, am I DevRel? I serve a lot of DevRel functions, and I guess you could probably, I have a lot of opinions about DevRel because, what bucket do I fit into? It's probably DevRel, right? But like, what am I really? Am I marketing? Am I sales?
I've heard some people in like speaker rooms describe you as a developer influencer. I don't feel one way or another about that, but just speaking about what box you fit in, which I think is closest to DevRel.
Right, exactly. And so I hired him because I think it's exciting to build. Like, I was like, man, I want to build something with this person, right? And I think the feeling is mutual. So I don't know. It's going to be kind of exciting to see what we can build together. But I wouldn't say that I hired him as DevRel. His official title is Director of Technology. So he doesn't even have a DevRel title. But really, like, how do I find somebody that can do what I do, right? Like, this thought is built on, me and my team, of course, right? Like, I couldn't do it without my team. But like the top level funnel, if you think about it, comes from my network. So I'm looking for somebody else who can do the same thing I do from a top level funnel perspective, whether you call that DevRel, whether you call that sales, whether you call that marketing, it's similar to what I do. We'll probably do very similar things, but it's really, in my opinion, it's just building something cool together.
Awesome. Yeah, I've heard DevRel be described as pre-funnel. So not even top of funnel, but the sales funnel begins somewhere and DevRel is just before that, because these relationships eventually convert over time.
Yeah.
Okay, this person aside, how do you measure DevRel at this dot? Because given that it doesn't show short-term revenue, is it more like how many friends did you make in the last quarter? What's the criteria there?
Don't really do a lot of measurement. I would say the level of measurement we do is really like for us, I think it's more eyes. How do you get more eyes? But I think it's also, for us, it's impact. Like, how do you create true impact? What does that actually mean, right? And so I think it is a very like touchy-feely type thing, because what is true impact? And I don't, true impact can be measured in many ways. Oh, I'll give you a great example. Render. Oh, my gosh. Okay. This company, all I wanted, I was going through the conference floor to get swag, obviously. There was a sticker book and I wanted the sticker book. So I said, hey, can I have a sticker book for the people at the booth? And they said, yes, but you have to scan this thing. So I said, okay, sure, I'll scan it. I scanned it. And then it says, okay, please enter your name, email address, whatever it is, which is fine. Fine. I'll enter my name, email address, all these other things. Okay, done. Can I have the sticker book? No, you need to confirm. Now go to your email and confirm that you have this, and then you can get the sticker book after you confirm your email. I said, you know what? This is so annoying. They gave me two options, email or phone number. So I said, you know what? I'm going to do my phone number because it's very easy to verify via my phone number. I put my phone number in. I'm going through the entire process again. I'm going to put my phone number in. Okay. And they said, okay, thank you. You've confirmed. I did the confirmation from my phone, right? It sent me the verification code. And then it said, okay, now give us your email address. I said, what? Give them my email address. They said, okay, well, now you need to confirm your email address. I was like, look, I just did like this. And they're like, well, sorry, you have to do this to get the sticker book.
What?
And I'm so pissed off at that company right now. But that is an example of the most awful, horrifying. I have, bad word of mouth is so much worse than good. So, I will forever remember that stupid sticker book incident and never talk good about that. And that's an example of somebody doing it really wrong.
Yeah. And then what's going to happen is, as a consequence, they're going to get a number of so-called leads or like DRQL. Right, exactly. DevRel qualified leads, if you want to use the business term. But what's going to happen is, at some point, these people, they're not even leads because they just gave you it because they had to. They didn't want to. And I agree with you. I think like when I was director of DevRel at Zeta, it was so important for us to, when people gave us their information, it was because they wanted to. They're like, hey, how can I just get in touch with you? How can I get the latest change logs? And they asked. We never asked.
Oh.
And we certainly never told. And so what we measure, even when I had the consultancy, what we measured often was how many people are asking you how they can follow you, where to get in touch with you, or your company. And that we found to be something really profound, instead of like forcing, because like people almost feel like you're taking something from them when you say, hey, now give me your email address if you want the sticker book,
Yeah.
And so we just gave away a bunch of stuff for free, and people were like, oh, cool. Can we follow you somewhere? And they're like, yeah, here's the form if you want. You don't have to.
It was funny because at Cascadia, Carter was nice enough to give me a booth area for Modern Web, but then I felt bad that I had this empty table. I felt like such a bad, I was like, oh my gosh, it's like, and so I just filled it with swag because I had it. And, people felt like they had to stand in line and talk to me before they got the swag. And I said, no, go ahead. just take it. It's okay. You don't have to talk. I mean, you can talk to me, sure, but like you don't have to talk to me just because you feel like you have to. Because having the swag, it's so funny because at Render, I had this suite and I had the this dot shirts in it, and I could tell who was in the room because they were like walking around with our gray this dot shirts.
Right.
And so I was like, oh, hey, I don't remember you, but you were obviously in the this dot, in the this dot room. So, that's enough, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's something really good. I want to highlight this for the listeners. You do a great job of this, and I think more companies should do this as part of their like DevRel initiative, which is get a suite in a hotel near the venue, and just invite people to come hang out and offer drinks and snacks. I've been to 2 of your suites, and it's been such a great time because there's often great people in there. There's LaCroix. I love LaCroix.
Yeah.
There's snacks, and it feels like home style. So I think, and also there's this this type of, it's not official conference sponsorship, but what I've seen companies do for DevRel is like they'll sponsor a thing around the conference, like after day 1, maybe there's a dinner or something on day 2, but after day 1, there's nothing going on. And so like I've seen like Replay will do this, for example. They'll be like, yeah, we're just going to go to this pizza place and buy pizza for everyone. So if you want to come. And that way, they're not spending the, $20,000 on a booth or something. It's maybe like $200 for pizza for everyone. And so it's a lower so-called investment, with probably much higher return because you're actually like meeting great people, and it's an experience as opposed to a transaction, right?
Yes, I agree. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I guess I've never spent $100,000 on booths to really track whether booths work, and everybody has different pipelines and different budgets, right? So that. I mean, do you remember Wrangle? Like, I don't know if Wrangle still does a lot of sponsorships, but do you remember when Wrangle was like sponsoring everything?
I don't even know what Wrangle is.
Oh, Wrangle.io. Okay. Well, Wrangle would sponsor, maybe it was just like a lot of Angular conferences I was at, right? Like Wrangle would be one of the key sponsors at those conferences.
Right.
So, there was a lot of brand awareness, of course, with Wrangle. But you really have to understand what you're actually trying to do, right? Because I would say the sweet thing that we did, that's not going to bring me, tons of business deals. I'm not talking to decision makers. I'm more just providing snacks and water and drinks for my friends, which is good enough for me, if that makes sense, right? And having good conversations that inspire me. Like, this guy who I met at Cascadia in the like a friend brought him to the suite that I had at Cascadia. He had on a Vue shirt, and then he contacted me after. Actually, Cascadia was a great place to recruit, if anything. Like, I've gotten so many resumes in from Cascadia specifically, but I had a good conversation with him, and then I'm like, well, I liked you. Let's see about working together.
Nice.
So he's doing an interview on Thursday. I mean, he's already been through 2 rounds of interviews.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, right? I mean, gosh.
How do you balance always be closing with always be a good friend? Because if I put myself in the mind space of, okay, I'm a founder, I've got a company, it's called this.labs, I'm going to get this suite and it's going to be great for business. That's business mode. But there's also friendship mode where it's like, hey, I just want to, like you said, I just want to have some snacks and invite my friends, and it's good enough for me. I struggle to balance this, and I often bias way too heavily in one or the other direction. Usually it's business, unfortunately. It's not always business, but I mean,
well, what do you do to close business? Like,
okay, so I appreciate your question.
Yeah.
When I'm thinking about it, as in when I'm thinking about it away from people, it's business. But the moment I have an in-person interaction, it becomes all about friends, and business goes out the window. This is how I work. So I think social interaction is the great like confounder. It changes everything. So when I'm not around people, I'm thinking about the podcast. I'm like, oh, I have to get these guests, and I'm going to produce these episodes, and I'm going to build this great asset that is going to bless a bunch of developers, and we'll monetize it, and we'll get sponsors and all of this, right? That's when I'm by myself. When I talk to you, when I talk to Attila, when I talk to Balash, when I talk to a bunch of folks, I'm like, oh, these people are awesome. Let's just hang out and have drinks. And so I guess for me, the people are the switch, so to speak. That tips the scale one way or another. I'm curious if it's similar for you, or how you balance those two.
I mean, I think this, you talk to any founder of any consultancy. I mean, and there's so many different consultancies, right? But most of the consultancies that I talk to, because they are kind of, we're cut from the same cloth, right? We vibe the same, if that makes sense. We're all very similar in the sense that we don't really, we're not pushy about it, right? Like, I don't know if I really, it's just by happenstance, right? And so maybe
Yeah.
it's somebody remembers, hey, Tracy and this dot, they do great consulting. Okay, think about us in the future. But it's never like, oh, hey, by the way, like who can you introduce me to? So I've never operated like that. But I will say a lot of people who I talk to always wish they operated better. And so like that's probably something that people are always kind of trying to improve on. I could probably improve on that too, right? Like if you have to ask. But I'm not a salesperson. I think, if you want to be something, whatever that is, whether it's you want to get more into sales, you want to get more into development, whatever your passion and your desires bring you to, you should just hang out with them a little bit more.
Yeah.
And it's funny to see how different people are though, right? Like like you go to a marketing conference, it's very different than like a developer conference.
Yeah, sometimes I find that a little bit sleazy. Also, not necessarily just marketing conferences, but I go to some conferences that are very big. They're branded as developer conferences, but they're huge.
Right.
And they're basically big marketing expos. And I don't know, I find myself but somewhat uncomfortable at these events.
Yeah. But you meet different people, so, but that's the same thing, right? Like, do you want to feel like you belong or do you not?
Yeah, wow, what a great throwback to the beginning. Let's talk a little bit about AI.
Okay.
You've been doing a lot of stuff with AI. I mean, your talk at Cascadia was tremendous. Honestly, I love the Super Mario theme slides. For those who haven't watched this, when the talk's available, we'll put a link in the show notes. How do you see AI shaping this .labs? What impact is it having? Is it affecting the future of the company? Is it affecting the current of the company? Is it presenting opportunities, challenges? Yeah, what's the intersection between AI and this so far?
I think as a consultancy, there's a lot more to consider, right? Like, for example, every time we start with a project now, we're asking them what their AI policies are. And every company has a different AI policy, whether it's, no, you cannot use GitHub Copilot. No, you cannot use ChatGPT. To, yes, you can do whatever you want. It doesn't matter. To, hey, you need to use ChatGPT, but it needs to be secure in XYZ way, whatever it is. So that from a consultancy perspective is very important. I think that if you aren't using AI to, like GitHub Copilot, for example, it's kind of silly not to, in my opinion. Of course, you again need to make sure that your company is willing and willing to let you do it, but it saves so much boilerplate time. And I also love the feature with GitHub Copilot where you can just copy paste the code into the chat, the GitHub Copilot chat, and it'll just explain the code to you. And it knows, it knows the project, so it can reference kind of what this code is specifically doing. But if I had that for me, I mean, even for me right now, it's great. But like, especially for junior developers, it's amazing. Or even, you talk about RxJS, a lot of complaint when it comes to RxJS is that, well, don't write RxJS code because people won't understand it, right? You kind of need to be a little bit more senior to write impactful RxJS code. No, I take that back. I mean, point being, to understand the reactive programming paradigm, it takes a mental lift, right?
Yes.
It's you need to shift your thinking. But for developers who are just coming in now, if they can just copy paste that and say, hey, what is this code doing? They can much better understand the code. I think also going from different framework to technology, right? Like, for example, one of our .NET experts needed to write some React code. And, they have a computer science background, so they know what they need to write. They just don't really know the syntax of it. But with GitHub Copilot, they can kind of tell GitHub Copilot, hey, I want to write this. And GitHub Copilot will kind of do it for you. And again, because they're a senior developer and they know computer science, they just need somebody to show them how to do it in React. All of a sudden, they are much better enabled to be able to do so. But again, it's like, you can't just ask GitHub Copilot to write you something and then, be done with it. You have to actually know what you're doing.
Yeah,
right.
You need that critical thinking complement to the
right. And that experience,
like the suggestions from
that experience as well. So I think there's that. I think there's a lot of people who are like implementing things like chat. Like we've implemented so many chatbots, right? We've done so many like RAG related things. We've done things related to entity resolution as well. So, for us as a consultancy, it's really educating people on what the capabilities are of AI. And just like the talks I give, it's really just being able to show people, hey, it's funny because, you look at AWS and their AI ML services that they offer, and so much of this stuff has been there forever.
Yeah.
But all of a sudden now it's there's attention on it, if that makes sense. But as a consultant, you just kind of need to know how to do things. Like Carter was so amazingly helpful, right? For example, I'm going to be giving a talk at that conference with one of my colleagues, Rob, soon. And I was like, well, can't AI write this for us? And so I asked Carter, I said, hey, how do we just get a bunch of Google Docs like into an Astra DB? And he's like, oh, just use unstructured IO. And I was like, oh, that's cool. So I talked to the unstructured IO DevRel people. And then, we have a video that's coming out and she just showed me how easy it was to get the data into that database using unstructured. And then boom. And so there's, it's actually really fun because it was also inspired by your talk. Because I was like, dude, can Vercel's AI SDK just generate slides for you? So Mark on our team, he created, so, we did the basic thing where we created a chatbot where it's just looking at all the transcripts for engineering and leadership that we've ever done. And we're asking it questions. And my goal, Rob is like, no, this cannot do it for you. But I'm like, I disagree. Can ChatGPT, now that I've given it all the information, just write the talk for me? But then Mark took it another step and was like, well, okay, fine. They're going to give you the information. But what if it generates the slides for you? And so he took it another step, which a video will be coming out where it actually generates slides for you. It's really cool. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. It like the output is not just like the chat, it's actual slides.
Wow. These slides they're expressed in HTML, I'm assuming? They're just web slides?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Well,
amazing.
Actually, I don't, he showed me a video just recently about it. I need to look it back up, but like it basically, actually you can actually go to it. Oh, here you go. Prompt engineering presentation demo. Yeah.
Okay. This link is going in the show note for sure. Yeah.
But, again, that inspired like your talk, for example, and we're going to be doing a little video because y'all should go look back at Tejas's talk and just be like, no, Tejas, that wasn't AI. That was not AI, Tejas. It was magic or it's not real. So I'm really excited to dig in a little bit more because, again, your presentation was so impressive how you just like all of a sudden it went from, text to images. Right.
Yeah, thanks. And then to video. Okay, I have one more question of AI before our final question. But this I think is really important because you run a consultancy, and this podcast is hosted on a platform called Acast.com. And Acast, they just sent out like a big disclaimer to all the creators about a new AI content policy. I'm also I have a book published with O'Reilly that I, for some reason, is like right here on my desk. In any case, even O'Reilly now has an AI. Yeah, I really don't know why it's here. I meant to give that away to someone and forgot. Anyway, they have an AI content policy where they forbid the use of generative AI for creating, obviously for many reasons, right? Part of it is because a lot of this content is from text that is maybe stolen from other authors. So it's like plagiarism comes into question and so on. As the person running a consultancy that does client work, are there what considerations are there for this type of thing? Where like, you're cool, we can use Copilot, but how can we be sure that we're not maybe sort of stealing work and doing consulting and billing for consulting, though we're not actually doing much of the work? And then I guess a corollary to that is, do your clients at all have any sort of reservations about the use of AI and Gen AI? Do they say, hey, don't use ChatGPT for this and that project?
It just depends on the client. It depends on the client and on the policies, right? So we work with like really large companies like Stripe and Roblox, for example. And then we work with startups who are just trying to POC something. And so it really depends again on the client, but we never bill for, we never like have AI generate us something and then say, okay, I'm going to bill 40 hours for this work. That's not what we do. But I will say that it was actually really interesting. We were interviewing and we were interviewing this person, and we give out take home code exercises. I'll never forget this one guy. He came to an interview and you could see him visibly shaking. And he like couldn't really even do the interview because like he couldn't even really talk, And I'm like, I won't bite, I promise. But it was so stressful for him to be in that situation. So that's why we do written interviews. So we do a take-home written interview where I ask a bunch of questions, and then we do a take-home written code exercise. But anyways, we got this code exercise and we're reviewing it, and we're like, okay, this person's kind of grading out as like a mid-level developer, but he wrote this like really complex RxJS code. And he must be like a low senior maybe or something, right? And we do another interview where we kind of talk through the code exercise. And it turns out that was all generated by GitHub Copilot.
Oh, wow.
And so it's kind of like, okay. And he wasn't really able to explain it, right? And so I think that, you need to know how to explain your code, like understand your code if you're going to use GitHub Copilot. But that was definitely like, so for us, we're like, okay, like we need to actually take this into consideration now that we're doing interviews. And we're not saying like, don't use it, but we're, it's like, because we use it, right? But like, you should use it with caution as well, right?
Yeah.
But I think that people who are not using AI and have those policies to not use AI are going to be left behind. I really do, because I think that is really where we're going in life.
Right. Yeah. I mean, these policies that I've seen so far to not use AI have been for things that are creative that you intend to monetize. So like podcast episodes, YouTube videos. Like YouTube now has a Gen AI feature where, I don't know if you've seen this, where you can either upload a thumbnail for your video or you click generate and it will generate a thumbnail for your YouTube video. With
I
AI.
know. I did not know that.
Yeah, it's using Gemini behind the scenes. And so I think it's just the creative works that they're being so stringent with. If you're just writing code and it's open source, what are you going to, you're not going to monetize that anyway. Awesome. All right, Tracy, I want to ask you the final question here today. And it's, so you value highly hanging out with your friends. And this question comes from such a scene, right? Like some time ago, I was with some friends. These friends were founders and CEOs of various tech companies. And we were sort of lamenting around like how they had to experience a lot of unexpected stuff and they had to like adapt and grow. And they were like, man, nobody teaches you this. And also I got in trouble once for saying that first time CEOs and co-founders or founders should really be called junior CEOs, because it sets the expectation with the team that you hire that, hey, it's my first time. I might make some mistakes. I might micromanage you here a little bit. I might drop the ball there. It sets the expectation for your team to like support you, as opposed to, I think CEO, we typically expect like professional CEOs who are not going to make mistakes and maybe who are just going to do more things right
professional
than the
CEOs
first time.
all make mistakes.
Right, you're right, exactly, yeah.
Different types of mistakes.
Right, yeah, exactly. Who are not going to make the mistakes that surprise us and then we get disappointed in. And so I got in trouble for saying this, but I think the sentiment sort of holds, right? So all that to say, my long-winded way of introducing the question, which is, look, we have things like HTML and CSS and JavaScript. These are specifications. There's literal documents saying this is HTML. When you write angular bracket and image or IMG, you get an image element and so on. If there was such a specification, like a living standard for the tech CEO or founder or co-founder, and it had a bunch of clauses like this is some stuff you can expect, this is some stuff that maybe is good for you to know so that you're prepared, this is how you avoid some mistakes that others who have gone before you have made. What would such a document have in it, according to you?
So the investors, in my opinion, look for people who are willing to be coachable. And if you're not coachable and you can't take feedback, then you are only going to be successful to a certain point. There will be a limit to your success. And I say that for any position possible. So a great example is the people who are willing to be coached. If you put like 10 people in a room, and 5 of those people are willing to be coachable and 5 of those are not. In 1 year, the 5 of those people who are willing to be coached and willing to just come in with no ego and learn together are going to be so much further along than the people who are not willing to be coached and who are not, curious and wanting to learn and kind of having that sort of mentality, right? And it can go from first time CEO and you've raised $100,000 or $0 to your first time CEO and you've figured out how to raise $100 million. You might still be awful at taking feedback or understanding what's actually wrong. And what I tend to find is that those people who are not willing to learn, especially in a CEO seat, they surround themselves with people who are not willing to give them challenge them, give them the true feedback. And what you see in those engineering teams, which we've worked with before, is things are just awful. Like nobody cares because nobody feels like they have ownership. Nobody's given autonomy, and you're just burning cash and burning money, but you don't actually know. And maybe when you find out, it's going to be too late. Maybe you've already burned that $100 million and it's too late, right? I was going to say ego, but I actually disagree with that because let's take Guillermo Rauch. I think a lot of people say that Guillermo has an ego. I know Guillermo, and I haven't seen his ego side, but a lot of people say Guillermo has an ego, and you kind of need that to basically get a $3 billion valuation on your company. You kind of have to have some balls, to just do that. And I really admire that type of person, right? But in life, we all make different choices. And so you kind of have to figure out what you want to do in life and where you want to be and what type of person you want to be or what type of leader you want to be as a CEO. And I would also say figure out the path that you're wanting to actually travel. Just because everybody tells you to raise money doesn't mean you have to raise money. Raising money comes with other situations. I could never do what Guillermo. I could if I wanted to, I suppose, right? But I'd have to be a very different person with a very different personality to become Guillermo and be like, yeah, $3 billion valuation, here we come. I feel much better growing a 250,000 person consultancy versus a $3 billion valuation product company, right? So I think that introspection is really important. I think working with a coach as well is really important. I think working with multiple coaches is important because, I don't know, Tejas, if you ever had a therapist, but like sometimes therapists are great for you and sometimes they're actually bad for you. So being able to kind of reflect on that. I would also say the feedback you get, the advice you get. Like, for example, if somebody is right out of college and telling you that you need work-life balance in your life and you agree with them and you're trying to like be incredibly successful and, be a CEO of a company or whatever, that person that's giving you that advice that you need work-life balance who just got out of college, I don't know if is qualified to give you that advice.
Right.
If you want to be a CEO of a company, maybe you should be getting advice from other CEOs. And if they tell you work-life balance, maybe it means something different. But like, be careful about the type of advice you get and who you actually take that advice from, because it could actually steer you in the wrong direction.
That's so good. The last piece actually has 100% overlap with Matt Bielman, CEO and co-founder of Netlify's answer to this question. Where, he said, we talked about Netlify and how he was so determined because, like, Netlify came up with a lot of the things that we see across the ecosystem today. Things like deploy previews and the GitHub flow, like all of the things that we say we agree in some way that Vercel does.
I was
maybe
going to say,
even better
that wasn't
to some.
Vercel? Just kidding.
No, Netlify invented. Yeah, okay, yeah. So Netlify invented that stuff, and he was so ahead of the curve. And I said, Matt, how did you like stick to your guns? And he said, I listened to the right people. A lot of people they didn't see the need. And so he was like, I'm not going to take advice from them until I show them the need, and then maybe. So it sort of is almost exactly what you're saying, is like you take advice from those who are in your shoes as opposed to those whose shoes are maybe like 3 sizes different.
Yeah.
That's not to say one is better or worse than the other. It's just there's overlap. So I really appreciate that. You mentioned about feedback. So my mother-in-law is a coach and a therapist, and Tracy, her children, aka my partner and that side of the family, just unbelievable. Absolutely. These are like the most emotionally and mentally stable and healthy people I've ever. It's unreal. It's like they're aliens. Like
you're like, whoa, this is what it looks like to be like normal.
Yeah. I don't even know if that's normal, right? Because normal is everybody's really messed up, and so they're like abnormally healthy, which I think is a great standard. But like, these are the products of coaching, and I want to echo what you said 100%. I think one thing that can help these people who aren't receptive to feedback, at least what I've noticed, I used to be this person, by the way, is they struggle with emotional regulation, from what I can see. Meaning, like, you give them feedback and they're going to be like, oh, what do you mean? And then they like sort of, the emotions take over and the prefrontal control goes down. And at this point, critical thinking is out the window, right? And so I in many ways, I see them sort of as a victim of just a lack of training on how to feel those feelings and still maintain like honor and respect and composure and a sense of like reflection. There was a psychologist who, man, I forget her name, but she was so brilliant. She said, we come into this world and the first thing we do is we cry because we're feeling a bunch of things and we don't know how to respond to them. And I think this doesn't go away, right? Like when you're an adult, a CEO, you may get feedback and you're feeling things, but you're like, oh my gosh, what do? I don't know. And then you either cry or you have some type of block. And for some people, it can be aggressive. For some people, it just be like, I'm not listening to this. This feedback is invalid. You are invalid. And they're super calm, but they're also dismissive. But this dismissiveness, from what I've seen, is just defense. Does that relate at all to this like lack of accepting feedback?
Yeah.
Okay. So then if you'd speculate with me a little bit, would you agree that an actionable takeaway for people who maybe are listening to this and going like, this is me, would be to invest in a coach, but also specifically a coach specialized in emotional regulation?
I didn't know there were coaches that specialize in emotional regulation, but I will say that, like, I don't know, sometimes you talk to people and you just realize, they just pull things out of you and you just realize that this is to be true. And sometimes coaches, like I've talked to a lot of coaches before, And sometimes they try to pull things out of you and you're like, I knew that already. Or this isn't working for me. Or, whoa, I did not realize that. That is such an interesting insight that you gave to me about myself. Well, like, let's dig in on this. So it really does take talking to people and finding the right fit when it comes to a coach. But I would also say that the people who aren't willing to get feedback actually don't know. So they don't have the necessary introspection to understand that that's what they're doing. So how do you save yourself, Tejas? If you used to be one of those people, like how did you get out of it? How do you know?
Yeah, I was the most toxic person at G2I. I don't know if you know Gabe Greenberg.
Yeah.
But honestly, like S tier CEO, one of the best I've ever had the privilege of knowing and have the privilege of knowing. Anyway, so I was at his company. I was the lead, the engineering lead, and I was so toxic, Tracy, that like 4 people quit. And in their exit interview, they were like, "Yeah, we just can't work with him. He's impossible." It was so bad, and like this obviously hurt their business in a big way. And so Gabe and Lee, the CTO, had a conversation with me, and they said, "Yeah, you're super problematic, and we have every reason to fire you. We want to, but we're not going to do that. We believe people can change, and we're going to get you a coach. We're going to literally spend a large amount of money, get you a really great coach, Michael Terrell, for those interested, and he's going to work with you, and we're going to fix this. And then you will stay, and hopefully people will stop leaving, and we'll get some talent back." And so they did that. They invested in me. And that's maybe a small, that's the tip of the iceberg. Obviously, there's a lot of other personal work that I've been able to do. But yeah, coaching and really recognizing, Tracy, that if there's constant problems every time feedback and me are in the same room, then I am the common denominator, right? Because like different people will give me different levels of bad feedback.
Yeah, but you're so introspective. Like how did you become like not realizing, like you're the problem creator.
Yeah.
And then you didn't know you were the problem creator. So how did you finally realize you were the common denominator?
Because I've been a software engineer since I was 8 years old. I've been writing code, and my brain works in a very pragmatic way. So even though I'm hard-hearted, or I was, the logic got to me. The logic of 9 out of 10 interactions where there's feedback and me go sour. The statistics here obviously put me as the reason. And so so it was not me reflecting on myself because I was blind to it. It was me reflecting on just the data. Hey, why does this always happen? And recognizing the common denominator is me.
Yeah, but that's still introspection. Like, a lot of people are unable to be saved even with that. But people just give up on you. People just give up on you, That's the problem.
Yeah.
But you got to drop this Michael Tyrell person.
Terrell. I will. I'll put a link in the show notes, and I'll also send it to you. Michael's a great coach. About giving up on people, I don't know. I recognize that that's a problem, but like we're all finite. You know what I mean? Like we all have to give up at some point if we are to maintain life. I guess this sounds very bad of me. I understand that, but like I don't know. What's the alternative? You just never give up on a problematic engineer that's bringing down your entire organization. It's difficult, right?
Yeah. I mean, these are all, technology, even in consulting, you think you're going in to solve technology problems, and like while you are, people. It's always a people problem. For us, it's always about helping them better understand how technology plays into their business strategy. Sometimes it's just development, right? It really depends on the team, So
it seems like you don't have a problem that a lot of the tech CEOs on the podcast and to be on the podcast have had, which I think is so cool. Which is so Brandon Bayer, Glauber Costa, the CEO of Terzo database. Brandon, we published his episode like recently. They all say they're building these very like engineering intensive products, like a deployment platform that abstracts away AWS and stuff. These are technically complex, but they often say actually in our discussions that the code and the engineering is not the hard part. The people also are not the hard part. They have according to them, really great teams. The hardest thing is marketing and positioning. It's infinitely harder than the code problems they're solving. But it seems like this dot doesn't have that problem because you're well positioned. You're like everywhere. So,
well, I would say we do, because I would say we're everywhere, but a lot of people don't realize that we do consulting, right? Just because we're everywhere, right? We're just hanging out, right? So that's our problem. And, I was actually talking to John Dunham, who is one of the co-founders of Sauce Labs. And he was saying that the best thing that ever happened to him, he's actually a coach as well. The best thing that ever happened to him was working with a brand strategist. So he recommended me to his brand strategist, which I'm going to speak to, because you know what they say, like if you're fundraising for a product, they always say create a pitch deck. But what is the goal of the actual pitch deck? The goal of the pitch deck is not really to have a pitch deck. The goal of the pitch deck is to get you as an entrepreneur to solidify what the heck you're actually doing and to be able to verbalize that in a way that people understand. So I think when it comes to branding and marketing as well, it's the same thing. Are you able to, tell people on the internet or wherever it is, what you're actually doing, what you're actually building, what you're actually trying to solve in a way that makes sense so that people want to purchase from you? And if you can't do that, then that's incredibly difficult. But I'll also say, as I'm constantly trying to improve, of course, I know this has been successful to date, but I want to be more successful. And so that's the thing that I'm really focusing on is, okay, how do we expand our offerings, and we are expanding our offerings, but then also how do we tell a better story about what this dot does from a consulting perspective?
Right. I'm happy to hear that this problem is still a problem. But I'm glad you're solving it. Okay, last question, I promise, and then we'll wrap up. Is what are you expanding to?
Well, we are expanding to offer more data science and AI offerings. And so we're really kind of doing a lot of AI consulting, meaning helping people understand what they can actually do with their data and helping them actually create POCs, based on that, right? Because that's what everybody's doing these days. And really helping people understand the landscape of AI, because I think that's also a big problem. If you don't understand what you're trying to do and what's out there, it's really hard to be able to create. And then, another thing we're doing is expanding way more into our backend offering. So we're doing a lot of .NET these days, a little bit of Java here and there, but mostly .NET. And that's exciting because I'm a Microsoft MVP too as well. And that's kind of what we're hiring for, but we're always looking to hire, I said this before, right? I'm really excited about this next 5 to 10 years of this dot and what we're building. Really excited about who I hired, and really excited to start adding new people to the team. But it's I don't know, Tejas, maybe it's I don't want to say it's like dating, but it's you have to jive with somebody. You have to when you're building a team, you have to build and jive with somebody and have the same work ethic and have the same goals and values and be aligned. And, finding that type of person is difficult. It's not an overnight thing.
Definitely with my DevRel consultancy, this was by and far the hardest thing I've ever had to do. But even harder than dealing with the European bureaucracy and also because I noticed a ton of people tend to embellish and just outright lie on their resumes and through interviews. And then it was painful. So I hear that. Listen, Tracy, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I would be so remiss if I didn't call out your just brilliant takes on so many things, from making your own sense of belonging and fighting your inner voices that say you don't belong and really taking that mantle, to hiring for diverse but also qualified people, all the way through to the technical side, the work you've been doing with RxJS, .NET, AI in the workplace. It's been such a treasure trove of information, and I'm so thankful you found the time to come and talk to us on the podcast. So on behalf of myself and all the listeners, thank you so much.
Yeah, it was good hanging out, and I guess I'll see you soon somewhere.
Yeah, we'll see on your podcast. Yeah, we'll see you.
Thank you for joining my discussion with Tracy Lee. I hope you learned a lot from it. I hope you learned as much as I did about creating space for you to belong, about the origins of this .lab, but also its rise to success, their future plans, and so much more. If you're learning from and or enjoying this content, then a great way to support it without any really cost or effort is to leave up to a 5-star review on Apple and or Spotify if you're listening there. If you're watching on YouTube, then if you subscribe to the channel and like this video, that would help a lot also. Of course, if you want to share any of this on social media, I won't stop you. Thanks so much for sticking around. Thank you for being a part of this podcast. And most importantly, thank you for your interest in engineering.